thank you so much to the Serna Center. I just found out a little more about the Sernas, and I want to pay tribute to them, both for how they celebrated diversity and made it a tradition of the city as well as this campus. But I also was told that both lost their lives to cancer, which at one level is deeply connected to a worldview that cannot respect diversity, is not able to see what diversity is doing in society and in nature, and therefore has declared a war against diversity. And that war shows up in all kinds of ways. The new diseases, the epidemics of cancer. I was told the other day that if things carry on the way they are in this country, 1 in 2 people will have cancer in the next few decades, and 1 in 2 children will be autistic. Now that's not designing a very good society. And human societies are supposed to look ahead, and they're supposed to anticipate. And I know the First Nations of this continent, as well as in India, we always looked ahead and said, let me act in accordance of the impact of the 7th generation. But if it's good for the 7th generation, I'll take the action. And if I can't be sure, I won't. But today's bottom line is so shrunken in space and in time. In space, it's shrunken to the quarterly returns. In time, for the politicians, it's maybe 4 years to the next election. And that 4 years to the next election is getting more intimately connected to the returns on the quarterly basis because of the way campaign financing happens. And there is literally a giving up on the future. No species has deliberately said, we will shut our future to ourselves. Humanity has not said this till this present time. And it's the first time in our evolution, collectively, there have been parts of human beings who mismanaged their context, overexploited their soils, desertification put them to extinction. But it was always localized in space and time. It's the first time we have a global capacity to say, and we might enter the next century of this Earth's evolution without the human species. And this is the evidence that all of science is giving us. So it is time to step back and cultivate diversity, because without it there is no life. Diversity weaves the web of life. It weaves the ecological web of life, and it weaves the social web of life. And yet for 200 years we've had this very erroneous thinking based on separation, a very artificial construct. I mean, Newton actually said God made the world as immutable particles that can't be destroyed. I spent all my time in physics learning from particles to particle physics to, there's always the next step, and then the particle disappears and becomes a wave. Got it so wrong, but they're still clinging to this atomistic idea of fragmentation. And a whole worldview has been developed. It sadly is still the worldview taught in most of our disciplines. I wish everyone had a lesson on quantum theory in year 1. Ecology and quantum theory, because both teach you the same things. Quantum theory tells you you can't separate the world. Reality is non-separable. That was the subject of my PhD. Ecology tells you everything is interconnected. And because everything is interconnected, the impact of one has an impact on the other. And ecology therefore creates a culture of responsibility. Whereas that Cartesian worldview of separation, of Newtonian, Baconian worldview of separation, basically first assumes nature's dead, so you can't kill her anyway, and then goes on to say, and women don't know how to think, and most cultures have never had knowledge, and we are now going to create a breed of supermen. And Bacon actually wrote a book whose title was The Birth of Masculine Time. In India, time is Kali. And the beautiful thing about Kali is she creates circular time. Nothing like linear time, which is one more construct. That things go like that. They always climb upwards. So the GDP just keeps going like that. And you keep working on an assumption of a limitless growth on a limited planet. That's why we need Year 1 introductory classes on ecology, particularly for the economics graduates. Because, you know, over these many years, as I look at the world we are living in, I don't know how many of you are aware that the GDP is, again, just a half-century-old construct. A little over half-century. In this country, the idea of growth was created as a way out of the Depression, mobilizing resources, and mobilizing resources for the war. And then it went on to become the only thing you measure in economics. And the definition of growth is, if you produce what you consume, you don't produce. So because nature circulates water in this amazing hydrological cycle, she's not producing water. No, Coca-Cola produces water, manufactured by what do? Just go and steal it, which is why 3 communities that I have worked with in India have shut Coca-Cola plants down. Bottle. I took a pledge when I went to support the women of Lachimana. You know, I asked them, I said, what do you want me to do? And the 60-year-old woman who had led the movement to shut down Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola shut down, she's no more, she passed away, my Lama. And she said, go tell them in Delhi that when they drink Coca-Cola, they drink the blood of my people. And I've never been able to touch Pepsi or Coke. I mean, I could never drink the liquid brown stuff, which is still a trade secret. It was never a good taste for me. But sometimes you're thirsty and in the heat, and they've got such a monopoly, the only bottle available is either an Aquafina or a Kinley, which in your part of the world is sold as the Thani. I go without water. I've never been able to touch those drinks because I always remember my Lama. So this idea of separation has not just allowed this license for destruction. It has allowed a construction of a science that can shut out the contributions of other beings and other people, and an economics that can shut out the contribution of all others. Suppose we have an economic system that doesn't recognize the contributions of nature. And it's developed in a way that, because if you produce what you consume, then you're not producing, then most women who are producing for sustenance are not producing. That's why women will say, I don't know. They're slogging morning till evening, taking care of families, taking care of children, taking care of the sick. They're cleaning, washing. And at the end of it, they say, I don't work, because they've internalized this thing of what's work. Even the term breadwinner, you know, and they say, who's the breadwinner of the family? The fellow who's playing cards outside is called the breadwinner. And the woman who's growing the food, they say, doesn't work. And in the case of the appropriation of the contribution of others, My life has been totally shaped in the last 30 years by this strange assumption, which has been imposed to the world as law, the assumption that corporations invent life on Earth. So I was invited to a meeting in 1987 where the old chemical corporations were present. It was a United Nations meeting, a Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation meeting, and it was a small, intimate meeting of business and industry, UN officials, and some of us independent scientists, to look ahead and say, what does biotechnology mean for agriculture? You know, what are these new technologies? What do they do? The conference, interestingly, was called Laws of Life. And what are the laws of life? And the industry representative said, we have to do genetic engineering because the only way we can take patents. And a patent is a claim to invention, which allows the patent holder to collect royalties for what they have invented. So a mind like this, some company would have designed it first, and everyone else who made copies of it has had to pay a license fee. That's what intellectual property rights are about. In software, Mr. Microsoft decided he was going to patent software, and that led to the open software movement, where people said you can't patent software. The idea of patenting life forms, seeds, and then imposing it on the world through an intellectual property rights agreement in the free trade treaty at that time, which became the World Trade Organization, is what led me to the commitment to save seeds. I'd anyway been working for biodiversity, but 1987, at that meeting, I said I'm going to spend the rest of my life defending the freedom of biodiversity. Freedom from patenting, which is linked to genetic engineering, and freedom for all life to evolve in its own trajectory of diversity. Because what is diversity? Except the expression of freedom. Why are so many cultures there? Because different communities evolved in freedom. My country evolved to wear saris, and I'm so glad because weavers do such an amazing job. In other parts of the world, clothing was different. Different parts of the world eat different things. Now, I'm a vegetarian, and my vegetarian friends asked me to condemn eating of meat. I said, how can I go to the people of the Arctic who live in the snow and say grow vegetables? You know, they might start growing vegetables because of climate change when the Arctic will melt, but not just now. You know, just now, they'll eat what is available to them. So diversity is an expression of freedom. And it is the urge of life to express life in different ways. So in India, for example, they've just done an anthropological survey and found 6,000 languages. And on the world level, we don't know. And the beautiful thing is, when you step out of these metropolitan centers of sameness, where the logos of McDonald's and KFC and Coca-Cola, we just passed 3 trucks of Coca-Cola in a traffic jam. Why do so many trucks of Coca-Cola have to move all the time? But outside the sameness, you step aside. You know, you come to my region in the Himalaya, every valley dresses differently. They have different favorite foods. You go to Rajasthan, they eat millets. You go to the coastal areas, they eat rice. You go to Karnataka, the staple is the finger millet, the ragi, the richest source of calcium. With ragi, you can really be a vegan and have no deficiency of calcium. Or I went to Uganda to train them at that point on the free trade issue. Uganda's staple is the banana. The only culture of the world that eats the banana as a staple. All of us eat the banana, but they eat it morning, noon, and night. But of course, when you have to eat it morning, noon, and night, you've got to eat a lot of diversity. Just as much as in India, the rice cultures, and they call, in Sanskrit, rice is called prana, life, breath of life. Our women evolved 200,000 rice varieties from one wild grass called Oryzis sabina. That's intelligence. The intelligence of the rice and intelligence of the people working together. But intellectual property rights says nature does not create. Women who bred all of these rices and soya bean and corn don't create. A Monsanto puts in a toxic gene through genetic engineering and it becomes the creator. So I sometimes laugh and say, for those who don't understand either intellectual property rights because it is very convoluted, or genetic engineering, which is even more convoluted, just remember GMO means God move over. We are the creators, we collect rent from life, and we are going to get super wealthy, which we'll spend, that money we'll spend then on destroying democracy and preventing California first from having the right to know, and a little label to say, is this food genetically modified? If they hadn't ripped off our farmers, they wouldn't have this money to share. $10 billion is my calculation of the corn and soya royalties. With 95% corn and soya in this country is now GMO. 10 billion. 95% of the cotton seed in India is now controlled by Monsanto. Around 200 million every year. Brazilian peasants sued Monsanto 2.2 billion for royalties collected for farm-saved seed. So here's nature that's given you the seed, here are farmers who've evolved it, farmers grown it in the field, and Monsanto comes along and says, you are stealing my machine. They call the seed a machine. There's a terrible case of, there are two bad decisions made by the Supreme Court of this country. One was, I think 2010, Citizen United, which ruled corporations are person and stealing democracy is their free speech. Taking away society's free speech is their free speech. They're now taking it to Maui, so I met some of you from Maui. They're suing the county because the county said we'll have a moratorium till there's more science to assess the impact of GMOs. And Vermont, which managed to get a labeling law through, they're suing them to say, if you as citizens know what you're eating, your right to knowledge and your freedom to choose is taking away our free speech. Well, this hour, there's no hour behind it. There's no person behind it. Basically, the limited liability corporation was created beginning 1600 with the East India Company. Because at that time of colonialism, these ships used to go out, steal the gold from Mexico and the Peruvian places, steal our textiles and our spices. But then they were all stealing. And then they were fighting each other on the seas. They used to be called merchant adventurers. So the kings and the rich people would put money in, and if you lost the ship, they got nothing back. So they worked out a brilliant system, which is the beginning of the corporation, limited liability corporation. If the ship comes back with the gold is ours. If it got lost on the way, the losses are society's, they'll pay us. That's what it's all about. Otherwise, why do those 10 rich men have to come together in a corporation? Now, so today we're still the 10 rich men, and they're saying this other thing they've made as a legal entity. Can you imagine if not-for-profit 501c3s went around to say, here are the 20 of us who work for women's rights or the rights of species threatened with extinction, but then the 501c3 is also a species. They wouldn't allow that, but in the corporation they allow the legal entity to become a person. And that's a huge ontological flaw. It's changing the world in which we are, in a serious way, because it's taking away the rights of all species, and it's taking away the rights of real persons. to give this fictitious person all rights. And as I said, it is an error, and the only way it will be corrected is really through movements. Movements addressing the fictions that are starting to rule us. The second decision is a decision that took place with, it's called Monsanto versus Bauman. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this decision. But Monsanto sued a farmer who bought soybean in an elevator. He didn't buy soybean from Monsanto and planted it. Monsanto said, even that soybean is ours. Not just the seed we sell, but the grain that comes from the seed and gets used as seed, even that's our property. And sadly, the Supreme Court of the US ruled in favor of Monsanto exactly at the time where the Indian Patent Office rejected a Monsanto patent claim on climate resilience. Because in all these years I've worked with our Parliament, I've worked with our government to make sure our laws don't introduce this perversion of life being an invention. And our patent law has Article 3J, which says biological processes are not invented. And that is the basis of our patent office rejecting the Monsanto claim. If you need to know more about this, you can go to the website of Navdanya, the movement I started for the freedom of life on Earth, for protecting diversity, and with it the rights of our farmers, navdanya.org. And there's an open letter I wrote to President Obama when he was coming to India to put pressure on us to shift our intellectual property laws to start looking more like what the laws are in this country. Now, in the case of intellectual property and ownership of seed, there are new threats emerging, and I know I'm going to spend some time with some of you at dinner, because in 2004, in India and in the US, a seed law was passed. Let me backtrack. In this 87 meeting, the corporations that were present said, by the year 2000, all seed will be genetically engineered, all seed sold will be patented. There will be 5 companies controlling seed, and health and food. That's when I decided I'm going to save seeds. It is true there are 5 companies controlling the commercial supply of seed, especially the genetically modified seed. It isn't true that all seed sold are GMOs. It's still a marginal supply. It is most of the corn and soya, but there are 4 crops, corn, canola, cotton, soya, accounting for most genetically modified crops, and only 2 traits. Those 200,000 rices we had, every rice had a different trait. Yeah? Here we have 2 traits. Bt toxins put into crops, which is a gene taken from a soil bacterium to produce a toxin. So the plant is producing its own pesticide, and the argument was this is going to prevent use of pesticide sprays. And the second is the more commonly recognized, Roundup-resistant crops meant to control weeds. How well are we doing? The Bt crops have created superpests. The Roundup-ready crops have created superweeds. Half the farmlands of this country are overtaken by superweeds. And now they're bringing Agent Orange ingredient 2,4-D resistant crops because Roundup is starting to fail. The measure, these are technologies. A measure of a tool or a technology is how well does it serve the purpose for which it's meant. If this pen of mine runs out of ink, it's going to be in the garbage. With Roundup-ready crops failing to control weeds and creating superweeds, it needs to be in the garbage of history, as do the Bt crops. But that huge super profits collected through collecting royalties from farmers is what's keeping this failed technology alive and expanding, at the cost of taking away the freedom of US farmers to have their seeds or consumers to know what they're eating. Now, if neither end of the food system has freedom, this is not a food democracy system. It's something else. But it's also failing at a higher level of a food system. Even though the argument constantly made is all this is being done to feed the world, the reality is that only 10% of the corn and soya today is being directly eaten by humans. 90% is going for biofuel and animal feed. And it's going there because the subsidies are so high. It's not the case that it's more efficient. In fact, making biofuel from grain, diesel from soya, and ethanol from corn is a net negative energy system. My book, Soil Not Oil, has details on this, that you actually need more fossil fuels to convert the grain into oil than what you substitute. So you will actually need more fossil fuels. It's not a substitution. Just as much as GMOs are not substitutions for chemicals. You need more and more, and the data is there. I think it's about 500 million kilograms additional. It used to be 11 tons annually Roundup, and now it's 11,000 tons of Roundup in 92, 2007, 88,000 tons. And this was a system that was supposed to be an alternative to the use of chemicals. That's how biotechnology was offered. So it's not working as a food system because it's not producing food, it's producing commodities. And commodities aren't food. And the commodities are totally nutritionally empty. Because an agriculture based on fossil fuels is basically a very efficient way of taking nutrition out of the soil, out of our food, out of our body, rather than a system of nourishing us and giving fertility to the soil and maintaining the nutrient cycle. And all of the systems that give us food are systems based on the ecological functions and services of biodiversity. The entire industrial interpretation of biodiversity is it's a genetic mine. Just collect what you can, put it in Svalbard in this gene bank up in Norway. They call it the doomsday vault. When we save seeds and grow them out, we celebrate every seed's everyday life. We don't call it doomsday because we're cultivating hope. They call it the doomsday vault, they say, and they actually have a project, what do they call it? DivSeek. We're going to mine diversity for useful traits. That diversity does not have standing in and of itself. A rice seed evolved through farmers' intelligence is not a rice seed. When you pull out one trait and then mix it with a genetically engineered crop, then it has value. And I've been in debates where the biotech industry said by the time we are finished, the corn the farmer has calculated will have zero value. It's the genes we put into the corn that will be the only value, and therefore we shouldn't be surprised that the prices that the farmers get keep falling. My assessment is it's a 1% economy. Of whatever consumers pay, farmers get less than 1%. Therefore, it becomes more and more difficult to stay on the farm, maintain family farms. Land is mortgaged more and more. Farmers are displaced, and that too has consequences. But if we look at biodiversity and what it does, you grow biodiversity, you compost it, you put it back into the soil, all the nutrients you need are being provided by the soil organisms that are doing tremendous work. There are more organisms in the soil than the diversity in our forests and our oceans. But because industrial agriculture defines soil as an empty container. Empty container which held only two things. The chemical fertilizers you brought from outside and poured in, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or to hold the plant. That's all. For them, there was no living soil. And that's why in the agriculture we practice and the agriculture we teach, and every year now we run a 1-month course from 1st of September to 30th of September on the A to Z of agroecology and living food systems. And we work with living seed, living soil, living food. Because the dominant system treats seeds as dead, just genetic mines, soil as an empty container, and food as just an empty commodity that you ship around. You speculate on it. It's not for nourishing anybody. So we can produce all the soil fertility we need and much more. Anyway, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium don't produce fertility. They take fertility away. And the nitrogen fertilizers that are applied are running off and creating dead zones in the waterways. And in the Gulf of Mexico is one mega dead zone. And nitrogen oxide that is emitted from them is going into the atmosphere. Is 300 times more destabilizing for climate change than carbon dioxide. And between nitrogen oxides, methane from factory farms, half the food of an industrial system is wasted. Why is it wasted? Because when you impose uniformity, and nature wants diversity, then you declare more than half the produce unfit for marketing. I just met this wonderful young woman from Portugal, who 2 years ago decided to address the issue of food waste by creating a movement which she calls Fruta Fe, the ugly fruit. The fruit that was decided by the market not to be worthy of eating, but that it was slightly smaller or it wasn't the perfect roundness, that's the organic market she's created. And it's exploded. Then they burnt her truck. The consumers contributed to get her truck so they could get fresh, biodiverse fruit, which in the cosmetic appearance of uniformity is declared that way. But take pests. Why do we have pests? There's nothing like a pest in nature. There are no pests in nature. There are insects in nature. And in a system which is in balance through biodiversity, no one insect becomes too dominant to destroy a crop or create a disease. This is what Rachel Carson wrote in Silent Spring. Nature has given the landscape of a wide variety, but man has tried with all his zeal to make it monotonous. That is how he destroyed the system of checks and balances by which nature keeps each species within the proper limits. That's 101 of ecology. Where did these chemical fertilizers that are destroying the soil and are seen as sources of fertility, or pesticides that are treating all insects as enemies eating up our food? If you see the ads of pesticides, and you should hear the names of pesticides, let me share with you some names. Ambush, ammo, arsenal, assert, avenge, brigade, charger, disrupt, enforce, havoc, honcho, infantry, lasso, roundup, revenge, revolver, savage, scepter, shotgun, sledgehammer. This is supposed to be about growing food and nourishing us. Food is life. This is a language and imagination of war. And the reason it's an imagination of war is because these chemicals have their roots in it. Chemical fertilizers were made in the same factories that make the explosives during the war. Harbour of Haber-Bosch of synthetic fertilizers was also shaping for the IG Farben cartel, the explosive factories. But worse, it's that same group of scientists of IG Farben working with Hitler who were making the poison gases, who were making the nerve gases, the gases that were used to kill in concentration camps. And the two parts of the legacy of that Nazi period have continued through the future of industrial agriculture, the tools and the imagination. The first is the legacy of violence. Because when you're designing tools for war, what you're designing is something that can kill. And it is still the case that the highest kill possible is the terminology for pest control, rather than the best balance possible. And the second is the deeper problem, and that is the intolerance of diversity. That anything that is free of you, anything that's different, anything that is the other, becomes such a threat to your existence that you must exterminate. So the concentration camps were labs of extermination. The agriculture that has grown out of that is a system of extermination of species. But you can't exterminate because there's evolution. That's why you get the superpests. That's why you get the super weeds. And in culture you can't exterminate. Which is why this new language has emerged in contemporary discourse. You know, if you look, any of you are social scientists or historians, just see the word terrorism doesn't exist before the 80s. Now, I decided to look at agriculture and sort of dedicate the rest of my life to a non-violent farming because of two events in 1984 in India. One was the Bhopal disaster, where a pesticide plant had leaped and killed 3,000 people on one night of 2nd December. And thousands have died since then, and hundreds of thousands are crippled. And that same June, Punjab, the land of the 5 rivers, fertile, prosperous, had been turned into a war zone. The military had been sent. And the Green Revolution was first applied in Punjab. The Green Revolution is the name given to chemical industrial agriculture when it's introduced in the Third World. It's not green and it's not very revolutionary. So by the end of the year, I'm asking myself, why is there so much violence related to how we grow our food? And this question was particularly sharp for me because the Green Revolution had been given a Nobel Peace Prize for creating a prosperity, and through prosperity, peace. There wasn't any prosperity, nor was there peace. So I was working for the United Nations University at that time. I said, I've got to look at this, something's going on. And I did. And I wrote a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution. And I realized that the reason the Punjab farmers had taken to the guns and were using bombs and had become extremists was because the frustration and anger of being pushed to death. They were prosperous farmers. And now they were in debt. Their soils had lost fertility. The water was disappearing. Now there's a cancer train. An epidemic of cancer so huge that a whole train takes patients of cancer to Rajasthan for treatment. And so this prosperous community is rendered in deep crisis, so they of course react. And the government, instead of saying they had something to say about agriculture, they actually had put out a huge declaration saying, if a community cannot decide what it grows, cannot determine the price at which it's sold, cannot determine how it's cultivated, cannot decide the use of the water of their own rivers, this is slavery, and we're living under conditions of slavery. That's what they were trying to fight against. Instead, the army was sent and to the Golden Temple, the sacred shrine of the Sikhs. They were mad. 2 of the Sikh bodyguards of Indira Gandhi, our Prime Minister, killed her. The next day, 3,000 Sikhs were killed in Delhi and other places, and that vicious cycle just went on and on and on. Today, the farmers are committing suicide. Punjab is one of the 4 pockets of high farmer suicides. 291,000 is the government figures from 95 to now. The other pockets are all cotton areas, and 95% of the cotton is Monsanto's agriculture. Most of the suicides are concentrated in the continent. Now, none of this violence was necessary, except as a result of trying to convert diversity into uniformity with violence. Because there's no way you can convert diversity to uniformity without coercion, whether it be societally or it be ecologically. Monocultures must go hand in hand with militarism on the one hand and monopolistic control on the other. Diversity, on the other hand, goes hand in hand with peace and a shared prosperity, creating economies of permanence. Now, the two areas of extremism that are today big in the news are Syria and Nigeria. Go back and look. Before 2009, was there the language of ISIS anywhere? No. Was there Boko Haram anywhere? No. 2009. By the way, Syria was not even part of the Arab Spring. There was no civic revolt against Assad. 2009, there was a very, very severe drought. And of course, in the years before, on the one hand, you've got this imposition of agriculture model where farmers can't use their own seed that are adapted to arid zone conditions. They have to use these seeds bred for chemicals. They are forced into the free trade system of globalization. So everything has become unstable and vulnerable. And then you get the drought of 2009. In one season, 1 million herdsmen and farmers lose their livestock, lose their crops. They move to the city in protest. Assad can't deal with it. He responds in violence, just like in Punjab, in India, government responded in violence. Instead of saying, we're going to create climate resilience. We're going to bring seeds that can deal with intensifying drought. We're going to make sure we have insurance coverage for these periods of climate change. They start throwing them into jail. Some people start to get armed. It becomes Assad and a revolt against Assad. Of course, the global world is only too keen to do one more regime change, so they equip the rebels, and out of all of that armament, you get ISIS. If you just apply your mind a little, just like the superweeds in the Roundup Ready fields, is the assertion of evolution. Could ISIS be like the superweeds of cultures? Their pressure on evolution is becoming so intense. And instead of responding to the ecological vulnerability and the responsibility that we've created agriculture systems that are leading to desertification, we've created a global agriculture model which is contributing 40% greenhouse gases, further destabilizing the climate. Shouldn't this be a time to retreat from those models instead of using more militarization as a war against diversity? And Boko Haram is the same. We'll be having we're putting out a manifesto on soil and land this year because this is the year of soil. And it should be up probably by middle of May, because that's when it will be released at the expo in Milan, which is dedicated to food. And you can look at it, you can look at the maps of Lake Chad. Lake Chad supports about 5 countries around it. There's no water infinitely. A giant lake crossing 4 countries. So it's just a little bit. The fishermen have lost their jobs, herdsmen have lost their work, the farmers have no food. So instead of putting these new conflicts that are coming from displacement into a box of religious divide, if we were to put it into an ecological matrix of increased vulnerability, we will start to cultivate diversity as a process of peace, instead of further destroying diversity, cultural and ecological, for further wars. I don't know how many of you are aware, when the Iraq invasion took place, one of the first decisions made was something called an Iraqi Order 81. You know, this is the Golden Crescent, where agriculture evolved, where barley and wheat and oats evolved. Iraqi Order 81 made it illegal for Iraqis to use their own seeds. They had to buy Monsanto seeds. And if you think it only happens in places far away, it's happening in this country today. I mentioned the 2004 seed laws. In India, when I suddenly saw, and you only get this news in the financial papers, interestingly, where it said, new law for seed being introduced. And since I've worked so long on seed, I could understand from the language, they're going to try and make local seeds illegal through something called compulsory registration. You got to take permission, even for your little kitchen garden. So I built up this huge movement, and we've always taken inspiration from Gandhi, both in terms of freedom and self-rule and self-governance, which he called Swaraj. And that's why I'm so happy to do my Hawaiian tour this January, dedicated to home rule, because it resonates so much with us. It's about sovereignty. And the other, which is such an important pillar of democracy in times of the decay of democracy, which he called Satyagraha, the force of truth. He first used it on a 9/11 in 1906. We call it the other 9/11, the 9/11 of peace. So that's the time the apartheid regime was being shaped. And the apartheid regime had introduced, by the way, apartheid means separation. And that's why I call separating ourselves from nature artificially in our heads, is eco-apartheid. So the law was passed that Indians, blacks, and whites would now be segregated, and they'd have to wear badges. The blacks and the Indians would have to wear these badges of a compulsory registration on the basis of race. And Gandhi said, we will not cooperate. We are one citizenry. We are all equal. We will not be divided by race. And he refused to participate in that law. That's the first time he used the word Satyagraha, the force of truth. Because for him, the truth of one humanity was a higher truth than this artificial construction of division on the basis of race. So we've always used his examples. For example, in 1930, the British wanted more guns to shoot more Indians to continue to rule a little longer. And they wanted to make salt a monopoly. So they passed a salt law that would make it illegal for Indians to make salt. And we are surrounded, we are a peninsula, you know, we're surrounded by the ocean. We make salt everywhere. And not only in the ocean, I mean, we've got rock salt, which now is being recognized as the best salt to eat. Gandhi walked to the beach, and it's called the Dandi March. And he picked up the salt from the sea and says, nature gives it free. We need it for our survival. We will continue to make salt. We will not obey our laws. Now, Navdani has built exactly on that philosophy, that nature gives these seeds for free. Our ancestors have worked with nature to evolve the diversity that supports our life today. We will not accept any technology that attacks this diversity, either through chemicals that wipe it out or through genetic engineering that contaminate the diversity itself. And we will not obey any law that pretends that these seeds were invented by 5 corporations. We will not recognize patent law on seed. That's how we've managed to shape our laws. That's how in 2004, when they decided they were going to pass a law to make local seed illegal, I immediately traveled the country and told farmers about it, collected signatures, and took more than 100,000 signatures to our Prime Minister that time, Manmohan Singh, and said, Dr. Singh, you know we're in the land of Gandhi, and Gandhi taught us not to obey unjust and brute law. Salt law was bad, this is worse. The salt was about salt, this is about all life. And it is our duty to defend the integrity of biodiversity. It is our duty to obey the higher law of Gaia, of ecology, of the planet, and of humanity. We will keep seeds open source. We will defend seed in the commons. We will not obey any law that makes it a crime to save and exchange seeds. The Indian law has not passed. Similar law Europe-wide, the tiniest of little islands in Greece, where young people who are unemployed are moving back to the land to be farmers because there's nothing else. The law would have made it illegal for them to have their seeds and grow their food. I worked with the European parliamentarians in the European movement. The laws were sent back with more than 1,200 amendments. The Commission has just withdrawn formally that law. But that 2004 law was passed at the federal level in this country. Last year, there was an aggression against seed libraries. Maryland, Pennsylvania, Minnesota. Even in this country, in this state, there's a seed law of a similar kind. There's an attempt to pass such laws in Africa. There was an attempt in Colombia where the peasants rose and said, we are not going to be criminalized for having our own diversity. So I would invite you to, first of all, become far more familiar with what's happening to seed and biodiversity in your region, your county, your state, as well as the country. And I would invite you, celebrate this 2nd of October. We celebrate the fortnight of 2nd of October, which is Gandhi's birth anniversary, to the day of non-violence, but it's also a day of standing up for truth in a non-violent way, to 16th of October, which is World Food Day. We celebrate it for food freedom and seed freedom. And food freedom and seed freedom means the freedom of diversity. The freedom of diversity means both recognizing that without those bees and butterflies that are being exterminated by pesticides and Roundup, we're not going to have food. They contribute $200 billion worth of our food system. Without the soil organisms and the organisms in our gut, our brains won't function right. That's why there's a soil-gut-brain connection that scientists are making. There needs to be much more research on why are neurological problems growing so fast? Why is every second American child condemned to autism down the road? Why are they being deprived? The full functioning of the brain, and the full functioning of the gut, which is related to full functioning of the ecosystem. There is no division. There is no separation. You can't poison the world out there and accept healthy bodies and healthy brains. We are connected. And that connection and that recognition of that connection is the path to peace, it's the path to a shared prosperity. It's a path to a richer life in every way. Because a monotonous, violent monoculture compared to the freedom of diversity, which is a better option for humanity to choose. The sad thing is in this country, you all need to be much more sort of define that you're a think tank. Why should a Samuel Huntington define this country's thinking on cultural diversity? He actually wrote a book full of nonsense. The Clash of Civilizations. And he writes in it, I can't know who I am till I know who I hate. And that's how all of the extermination of other cultures has become so naturalized in this country. And the idea of American exceptionalism is no one else but me. But not only do we need to love the other, we need to celebrate the other because they are the condition of our being. Whether it be the soil organism or the pollinators, or it be the other cultures. The farmers who grow our food who are getting nothing for the work they do. So some of you I know do yoga, and one of the first exercises of yoga is pranayama. Prana, life, the journey of life. When I breathe in, so hum. What does so hum mean? You are, therefore I am. If the trees weren't there and the plants weren't there to take the carbon dioxide and give us oxygen, we wouldn't be there. If the soil wasn't there to give us the food, we wouldn't have food. Therefore we are soil. And if all that biodiversity wasn't there to perform all these amazing miraculous functions it performs, in intelligence that the human mind cannot even start to approach, if that biodiversity and its web of life goes, we go. So it is time to realize that cultivating diversity is not a luxury, it's the very condition of our being, our joy, our happiness, our peace.